You're watching Force 13's live streaming service.
And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for August 18th, live. Well, we have 4 storms active and 1 still remnant as the same as yesterday. We have Tropical Storms Grace and Henri in the Atlantic. Tropical Depression Fred still hanging on there inland. Linda is still a Category 2 by our analysis, and the remnants of 16W are still there, but just barely. 55 storms have formed so far this year. It's day 79 of Atlantic hurricane season. Fred is located inland at this point. It's now a depression. Looks like the Atlantic imagery, or the Atlantic didn't update, but Henri is there. Grace is a tropical storm. Unfortunately, I forgot to fix this part, but that is a mistake there, so my bad there. Linda is a Category 2. It is continuing to remain an annular hurricane as it continues westward, and it is expected that it eventually weakens. We've been forecasting weakening with this, but it appears that it has been strengthening instead, so we'll figure out when this does weaken as we head into day 95. The chances for 16W have remarkably decreased over the last 24 hours. We're now down to a 20% chance of reformation for 16W. It does not look like it is going to be the tropical storm that we were once expecting. The JTWC has actually issued their final advisory on it. In the North Indian Ocean, we're still looking out for nothing going on here. It is all quiet with absolutely no storms expected, and of course no storms in the coming 5 days. Obvious of what you would expect in this part of the year. Moving on over to the Atlantic imagery that actually has the storms in the correct places. You can see Fred there that is pretty much exiting northern Georgia and entering into Tennessee and Kentucky. You also have Grace there that is pretty much going through Jamaica and almost out of there, going back into the Western Caribbean, and then you can see Henri south of Bermuda there. In the Eastern Pacific, you can quite clearly see where our lovely Linda is, just sitting there as an annular hurricane that over 30 miles wide, and it is definitely maintaining its appearance and has been doing so pretty well today. And then of course in the Western Pacific, not much going on here. You can hardly see where the remnants of 16W there are. The conditions are really not supportive for it to come back. The only thing supporting its return are maybe a few ensembles. Other than that, it does appear that 16W is pretty much a goner. It will not be receiving a name anymore. And then of course moving on over to the North Indian Ocean satellite imagery. Once this does load up, there we go. We have the monsoonal pattern continuing across parts of the North Indian Ocean. Typical of what you would expect at this point of year. Obviously it is still August. We don't usually see those storms coming back until mid to late September at the very earliest, but obviously October is more common. And then of course our floater for Grace, which is going to be the main topic of discussion. Hurricane warnings are now in place across portions of Mexico, and hurricane watches are in place with the Cayman Islands. So of course we're watching this organized still, even though it's been in Jamaica. Jamaica really did not hinder the system at all, and it is expected we could be seeing some quick strengthening begin once this emerges out fully. Here are the sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific. Those 30 degrees Celsius temperatures remain very close to the Mexican coastline. Other than that, there really hasn't been much changes. And then of course we're still looking at those Gulf of Mexico waters being the warm there, 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. Much of the tropical Atlantic remains around 28 to 29 degrees Celsius overall. The subtropics around 27 to 26 there as you head further north. Moving on over to the North Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal remains around 28 to 30 degrees Celsius as you head into the Arabian Sea. However, those temperatures drastically cool off, and by the time you get towards Oman, it's 23 to 24. As you head into the Western Pacific, most of those warmer temperatures of 30 degrees Celsius remain near the South China Sea, near the Hainan Peninsula, and of course surrounded by the Philippines. Some more areas that are just parallel to the equator there, not too far from it, are seeing those 30 degrees Celsius as well. Otherwise, much of the basin remains around 29 degrees Celsius. Here are the sea surface temperature anomalies. They look like this. We are looking at the Atlantic remaining near or slightly above average for all the storms active right now. Henri is some 2 to 3 degree above average conditions there, And then, of course, the Western Pacific and Eastern Pacific are seeing those temperatures near or slightly above average, with the Sea of Japan thankfully cooling from its anomalous temperatures. And that is where we end it. We are switching over to our coverage team for tonight. With me, we have Christian, Dakota, Amethyst. We also have DJ, Joey, Noah, and Orlando. How are y'all guys doing today?
I'm doing good.
Doing well.
It's a good evening.
Good
I've
to
been
hear.
doing well.
Oh, good to hear. We're going to be kicking it off with the latest on Grace. Christian has here the tropical storm force wind probabilities at the moment. We'll get to the code shortly, but as of right now, we are seeing this tropical storm force winds impacting Jamaica, where a tropical storm warning is in place, and then of course those Cayman Islands there already have a 90+% chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds. After that, those tropical storm force winds are expected to go into the Yucatan Peninsula, and then eventually into Mexico, where there's already at least a 40% chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds there. That is definitely going to be increasing in the days to come, and to the northeast there, at the top right of the image, you can see the wind field that we were expecting from Henri there. Christian, can you pull up the cone for us to use here? Christian does not seem to be with us, so I guess we're looking at this right now. Alright, too late. We're looking at the IR imagery. What it
Sure.
appears to be for Grace here.
That's the wrong one. There we go.
Not yet. All
Here we
right, Christian. I'm at Amethyst imagery right now, but we're looking at the IR imagery for Grace here, which is starting to make its exit off of Jamaica here, and of course it's looking pretty good. It has not gotten much disorganized, if at all. There, the pressure has actually been dropping from what Recon has been finding. Winds could potentially be up to 60 miles an hour by now. Of course, that's something that we're going to be monitoring. The advisory from the National Hurricane Center did come in just recently. Not sure what they have put, because I've, of course, have been working on putting this together and using the 21Z information with that one. So we'll see what happens with that. I will get back to you when we go back to Christian's National Hurricane Center stuff there. But of course, we are looking at that pretty healthy appearance there. And as I head into the Caribbean with those high oceanic heat content and warm sea surface temperatures, it is very much likely that we see some strengthening. The only hindrance appears to be some possible mid-level shear, and of course the relative humidity levels not being that high, around 50%. Some areas that might be slightly below that. We're going to go back to Christian's image, or Christian's cone for the National Hurricane Center there. Give me a second. Alright, here's the latest cone, if it loads. They have actually upped it to 60 miles an hour now. We are expected to see continued strengthening. There is a hurricane watch in effect for the Cayman Islands. Other than that, there's also a tropical storm warning. Still a tropical storm warning for parts of southeastern Cuba, although that is likely to be discontinued. Same with the tropical storm watch for western Cuba. It doesn't appear that those tropical storm force winds are going to be really reaching far into that. However, unfortunately, that's not going to be the case with the Yucatan Peninsula, where hurricane warnings are currently in place. Tropical storm warnings are also there to the south and north of those as well, as to be expected. And of course, that is taking an 85-mile-an-hour storm into the Yucatan Peninsula before weakening it. Once it reemerges back into the Gulf of Mexico, or if you want to be more technical, the Bay of Campeche, we could be seeing further strengthening again, and it is likely to reattain the same peak, although models have been slightly hinting on a stronger peak in the Gulf of Mexico, so of course that is something we're going to be watching. Regardless, both peaks from the National Hurricane Center are at this point 85 miles an hour, and of course after that landfall we are expected to see rapid weakening as it interacts with Mexico. So that is the current information as of the intermediate advisory that came out 10 minutes ago, and of course it is located at 18.3 north, 78.6 degrees west. Those maximum sustained winds, as previously mentioned, around 60 miles an hour, and the movement is currently at west with 15 mile an hour as that movement speed. So Christian and any other members in our team, what are you seeing from this cone, and what do you think the message should be to people who are looking at this cone right now and in the path?
What I would like to say at this time is pretty much for anyone that's
Get prepared.
in this path is they should be paying very close attention and should be preparing as quickly and as well as they can because there is a lot of unpredictability at the moment still, and you should be ready for the worst but hope for the best.
Yeah, and I would like to say for the people that are listening in Mexico and in the Yucatan, and also those on the southern Gulf Coast where the storm is expected to make landfall, we are currently in a situation where a lot can happen and a lot of rapid intensification is possible because the environment is going to be favorable and we have very high sea surface temperatures in the way of the storm. And don't really pay attention to the exact intensity. We are expecting a hurricane, and it could be a lot stronger than the cone is indicating at the current time. Um, any hurricane force winds can be deadly. They can turn down trees, can damage roofs. So just prepare for. Uh, I would honestly try to prepare for a major hurricane hit on the Yucatan Peninsula with observing current trends of the storm, and then also do the same on the Gulf Coast in Mexico and prepare for a significant hurricane impact, both with rain and wind impact.
And of course, right now, here are the warnings that we currently have in effect. A hurricane warning is in effect for the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico from Cancun to Punta Marrero, or Herrera, I should say, including Cozumel. A hurricane watch is in effect for all the Cayman Islands. A tropical storm warning is in effect for Jamaica, the southern coast of the Cuban provinces of Santiago de Cuba, Agrama, Las Tuznas, and Camagüey. We also have a tropical storm warning for the Cayman Islands, the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico from north of Cancun to Cabo Catache, the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico from south of Punta Herrera to Puerto Costa Maya, and of course we also have a tropical storm watch in effect for the southern coast of the Cuban provinces of Ciego de Avila, Santi Spiritus, Cienfuegos, Matanzas, and Pinar del Rio, as well as Isla de Juventud. So that is the current warnings we have in effect right now. Of course, that is likely to be continuously changing as we get further closer to the storm's peak intensity. Of course, while this may be moving away from the Caribbean, Haiti, and of course Jamaica, this is only going to be bringing itself closer to its next threat, and that is going to be the Yucatan Peninsula as well as Mexico. Thankfully, we were seeing the possibility for this to turn and make a turn towards Texas. However, of course, that the cone does not include Texas any further. And the tropical storm force wind probabilities at this time do not include Texas. Of course, that could change, as we always see with tropical cyclones. The forecasts do change, so it is definitely possible we could see that. We did have Christian. You did have the key messages there. There we go. Hurricane conditions and dangerous storm surge are expected over portions of the hurricane warning area in the eastern Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico late Wednesday night. So, of course, as of right now, we are saying this from Tuesday, so things are going to be deteriorating within the next 24 hours there. So if you need to make your preparations, your time is tonight, and by the time you get into tomorrow, those conditions are going to be quickly deteriorating. So please make sure you are prepared. Please make sure you have the necessary items that you need in order to obviously stay prepared in the hurricanes, have enough food, have enough water, and then of course you also want to make sure you're in some kind of sturdy shelter, especially with these hurricane force winds. Another threat with this is going to be the heavy rainfall across Haiti, the Cuba, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and of course the Yucatan Peninsula. This is going to be causing flash urban and small stream flooding. And then, of course, the potential for mudslides is the highest in Haiti still, even though this is moving away. Tropical storm conditions are expected over portions of Jamaica through this evening and over the Cayman Islands tonight into early to Wednesday. Those tropical storm conditions are expected to spread westward from portions of the southern coast of Cuba in the warning area to possibly other portions of the southern coast of Cuba and in that watch area through Wednesday. So, of course, Cuba is not out of the blue yet. While we are seeing the tropical storm watch and the tropical storm wind field remain well south of there, a watch is in place for the reason that there is still some isolated gusts possible after tropical storm force that definitely need to be watched for. So, of course, if you're watching for this from Cuba, you also need to be keeping an eye out on this as well, even though this system is well to the south. That is basically what I can say on this for right now.
And Xavier, we also have some news from reconnaissance. As of 16 minutes ago, roughly, we have a center drop zone which seems to support a minimum center pressure, which is now down to 1000 millibars. So another 2 millibars down from the most recent other fix, center fix we got. And before the storm went into Jamaica, I think we had a pressure of 1004 to 1005 millibars. So you can see the storm is strengthening now with the current pressure. The drop zone had 1001 millibars with a wind of 11 knots, and usually you go down 1 millibar per 10 knot winds, so that would be just 1000 millibars.
Yeah, definitely indicative of a strengthening system, and of course, as we see this exit the coast of Jamaica there, it's going to be back in water again, and of course, it's the only thing stopping it at this point, really, is its next obstacle, which is going to be the Yucatan Peninsula. So besides the lack of moisture, really, in terms of relative humidity, which still isn't too horrible, it's still around 50%, we're going to be seeing some pretty quick strengthening. Of course, National Hurricane Center, in their last comeback when the list was 50, was indicating a 20 in 12-hour change. We've already seen a 10 or a 5 knot increase in the last 3 hours. So of course this is going to be a continuously evolving situation. You'll see if this does end up rapidly intensifying. It's very much possible. And I do believe we have another thing that we're going to be putting up here shortly. Of course we have the satellite imagery. This might be hard to see given the fact that, of course, this is being shared from a camera, but you can kind of see the, I believe this is the water vapor?
Yeah, that's the water vapor imagery. I just wanted to point out some things about the storm. The center is roughly here, and the biggest steering factors are going to be this big upper level mid-level ridge, which is going to steer it roughly here, which is there, the Yucatan Peninsula. And the current most hostile influence on the storm is this thin PV streamer trough, which is roughly located here, which induces some westerly shear that has been especially seen in the storm about 6 to 12 hours ago. But since we can see that the influence of this upper level trough has decreased, because you can see cirrus outflow fanning out here, and also that we have an increase in convection and increase in cyclonic banding wrapping in towards the center on the western side where we have the shear. So we have a lot of upshear convection, which is a sign of intensification. And when you have a lot of convection, such a thin trough is likely to get eroded by this it's likely to get eroded by all the latent heat release and all the convection associated with this tropical cyclone. So the intensity of the current convection and the intensity erodes some of the shear that it has been experiencing. And with its current structure, this shrimp-like, when you have an inflow band like this wrapping in with convection wrapping around upshear towards the center, that's a structure that is very mature for a tropical cyclone. It's likely that when it goes northwest, north-northwest, and west-northwest towards the Yucatan Peninsula, it's likely to at least go into a period of very quick strengthening, if not rapid strengthening. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have a bona fide hurricane category 2, 1, or even a major hurricane making landfall at the Yucatan Peninsula later on in about 36 hours. Yep.
And here I have the ocean heat content. I know DJ wanted to discuss what we are seeing with the ocean heat content. DJ, would you like to explain what ocean heat content means, what it means for tropical cyclones, and what we are seeing ahead of Grace here?
Basically, the OHC is the heat is how warm the ocean. Like, I'm not exactly that well versed in that, but it basically I'm just gonna take a look, and you can see those very very warm. You can see those reds and those oranges there, even kind of getting into kind of maroon in the path of grace. You can see where it's off Jamaica. It's going to be moving straight through those very very favorable ocean heat content, and that's very helpful for the system as it will allow it to intensify. And that's just another bad thing for Mexico and the Yucatan that Grace is currently going to have in its favor. So it's not looking too good.
Yeah, a simple way to understand ocean heat content is basically how much deep warm water is there. In the Gulf Stream, you have, or more in the northwestern Atlantic, it's sometimes that you have at the surface 29 degrees Celsius, but that doesn't go down to a large depth. And in the west, and ocean heat content basically shows how deep the warm water is, because the tropical cyclone, it pushes water from the subsurface towards the surface. And if this water is very cold, just beneath the surface, the tropical cyclone is actually going to experience much colder water. And ocean heat content basically shows how much deep warm water is there. And basically, for the entire time that Grace is going to be a thing, sea surface temperatures and also ocean heat content will be absolutely no problem. They're 29 to 30, even 31 degrees Celsius in the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Caribbean. That's very favorable in terms of sea surface temperatures, so it won't have any problems with that.
Yeah, definitely some good signs there. So, alright, there we go. We're back. I was fixing some things with that. We'll be answering questions soon, so if you want to get a head start and ask some questions right now, please ask them. Just tag us at Force13. This will pop our name up in orange, and we will be able to answer some of those questions. Our team turned quiet, so I don't know if they're trying to figure out things right now or receiving new information or whatnot, but...
We're ready.
And my cat has said hi, so I'll be right back.
Well, while Xavier's gone, be sure to put your questions in the chat.
Yep.
I just want to reiterate while Xavier's doing that. If you are in the Yucatan Peninsula, if you are in Mexico, if you are in the path of the system, even if you are in southern Cuba, you do need to be keeping a close eye on the system and how it develops, the developing situation, because it's very uncertain currently. We don't know the scale of what could happen in the coming days. So do make sure that you are following all updates, all advisories, tracking the system closely, and making those preparations, especially if you are in the Yucatan Peninsula, because you have today to make those preparations, and then tomorrow conditions will be deteriorating as we head into Wednesday night.
So I think we got one or two questions.
I'm
MC
taking care of that.
Rubbermed says, at Force 13, any thoughts on Grace's intensity and track? Yeah, the track is pretty good with the models now. There's a lot of consensus that we're gonna have it into the Yucatan Peninsula and then into the Gulf of Mexico, making a landfall somewhere into Pico. And intensity-wise, it is pretty uncertain in terms of intensity, because there's a lot of sensitivity to how the inner core actually forms and how much it is able to intensify in the relatively short time it's in the Western Caribbean. But expect the storm to have a pretty high intensity ceiling. Likely Cat 3 to Cat 4 is the maximum intensity it could potentially have in both the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Caribbean. So if it does well and intensifies a lot, there's a lot of potential intensity wise with this system.
We had another question. I'll be the one that says what questions we got, so that way that makes things run smoother. We had another question that asked what our peak intensity is. Of course, we do have a cone that will be coming, and will be used around the same time that the video update does come out. As of right now, we are forecasting this to reach 90 miles an hour. Of course, this is conservative right now, in our opinion. We do think the National Hurricane Center will follow suit around 11 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's actually pretty likely that we do upgrade our cone to Category 2 tomorrow. It's all depending on if the trends that we are seeing right now continue. Of course, we do believe in making sure continuity is persistent before we do forecast higher or lower on the system. And of course, as long as this continues, then yeah, we will be definitely seeing a Category 2 out of this. It's definitely out of the question. But as of right now, we are going with 90 miles an hour for both peaks, the one for the Yucatan landfall and 90 for the landfall that we will be seeing, or close to the landfall that we'll be seeing with the Mexico side of things. So that is our current peak for that.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'd like to stress out that, like I've already mentioned, it's basically mainly following trends because right now it's a very volatile situation, and there's a lot of potential for it to really blossom in this favorable environment, or just end up tripping over its own feet, which happens time to time. So it's better to be safe about it rather than forecast the worst, which doesn't usually happen, but in this case, there's a good shot that it can.
Yeah, especially with some of these forecasts and with Grace overall, it's always a challenge, especially when you're talking about the amount of difficulties I had pretty much getting to where it was now. Of course, we had a lot of land interaction, and any scenario would have had severely different implications for what the future of the storm would look like. In terms of what we're looking at right now, we are seeing this storm emerge off the Jamaican coastline, and it's looking extremely healthy. It definitely has the look of quick intensification, probably about to start ongoing if it hasn't already. It does appear that it already has started, so I mean, I really can't say that it hasn't started yet. But yeah, this is definitely going to be an evolving situation. We're going to be watching these forecasts change as the National Hurricane Center has been changing them as well. And of course, this is the situation you see when you have landfalling storms. It's all a giant question mark as to how strong we're going to be seeing this. And the National Hurricane Center themselves have actually stated that the latter part of the forecast period, which would be the part where it's in the Gulf of Mexico, is extremely uncertain. So we could be saying if this doesn't survive the Yucatan well, it would be a much weaker storm. However, if this maintains a very healthy structure of the Yucatan, we could be seeing a Category 2 as it comes ashore on Mexico on Saturday. So that is something that we are having to monitor. There was another question here. Can Grace become the first major storm of the North Atlantic? If it does reach Category 3, that would technically meet the terms for that, and of course it's definitely not out of the question, so that is something we are seeing. Now, Christian, there were a few questions about Henri. Of course, that is another tropical storm active, so if you could pull up the stuff for that, that would be great. Alright, so here
I
is...
will try my best. I'm having some issues.
Alright, I'll try to go with what we got so far. So
right
here's the
about
latest...
Now, so I will see what I can do.
Okay, well, here we are with the latest cone on Henri there. This is the intermediate advisory. This also came out about half an hour ago. It's located at 30.2 degrees north, 64.5 degrees west. Some feedback issues in the background there. Anyways, we have it with winds of 65 miles an hour. It's moving west-southwest at 5 miles an hour. And on the current forecast track, it's going to be moving in a normally interesting direction for systems in this location. It's going to be going to the west. And it's going to be a slow mover for now. However, as it begins to turn to the north and northeast, it is now likely that it becomes a hurricane as it turns to the north and northeast. Of course, the track uncertainty remains relatively large. However, it has been shifting towards the west, so that has been an interesting development we've been watching. A tropical storm watch remains for Bermuda, and of course, at the moment, the National Hurricane Center is going with an 80-mile-an-hour peak. That would make it a Category 1. Addressing some of the questions that we have, there was a question from RetroFan42 asking any chance of Henri moving further west and threatening the eastern coast.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's especially in terms of the stronger the storm is, the more likely it is to get influenced by this mid and upper level ridge and be dragged a bit more towards the southwest, and before it makes its turn northward. If it just follows the low level flow, it's more likely to, or if it's weaker and follows the low level flow, it's more likely to stay more towards the northeast and make this sharper turn more towards the northeast. And if it's stronger than model forecast, it's more likely to go more towards the southwest and then take a broader turn towards the northeast.
We had another question. We did already address the Grace one, but they were asking if not only Grace, but could Henri also become a major hurricane?
Well,
it's unlikely for Henri to reach major hurricane status, as the environment it's in doesn't really support that intensity.
I'd say the answer is still a bit more complicated. Currently, Henri, not Henry, which is interesting, but currently it is in a relatively weak flow environment. There's about 10 knots of northerly shear, and this shear is expected to increase over some time, about the next 24 to 48 hours, and a little bit beyond, so 24 to 50 hours, we have an increase in vertical wind shear about to 20 knots, which is likely to have some negative impact on the storm. But then it's likely to move out of this northerly wind from this upper level ridge, which is over the Florida Panhandle at the current time, and is expected to move into a lighter flow area, which also allows for a better outflow channel. So equatorial and polar outflow channel, both those it could establish. And then we have it's likely to be picked up by upper level trough, and then HWRF, for example, depicts a very favorable looking upper level environment. Shortwave jet interaction with strong polar outflow towards the north, good upper level divergence, and a healthy looking outflow channel towards the equatorial direction. And if Henry's or Henri, not Henry, if it survives, or if it does good in this higher shear environment, where it's likely to suffer a bit in the next 24 to 48 hours, but if it's able to keep most of the convection around its center and doesn't become a misaligned vortex, which it was yesterday, then it's likely to re-intensify some bit with this more favorable environment. The HWRF has been going pretty much all in with the intensity, deepening it all the way to the 950s. We'll see if it goes all the way down to there, but there's definitely some potential of this system strengthening, especially with how favorable the upper level environment is going to look at the time it's about, which is about 4 or 5 days out.
Yeah, and the National Hurricane Center actually does not call for weakening. They say that the effects of the other environmental conditions should actually cancel out the wind shear, so that way there's really pretty much a neutral balance to the point that it's likely to stay at its intensity and not really weaken or strengthen at all. And then we should likely see that strengthening resuming in about 3 days. So that is something that we are going to be watching with this one, of course. If it does take a westward turn towards the Mid-Atlantic and New England, that would definitely not be good. Of course, any storm that strikes that region is always not great in terms of how it affects. Obviously, the New England area is not really that great when it comes to being prepared and efficient for safety of hurricanes there, so hopefully that does not take that track there. Some of the outer bands are still affecting Bermuda, but of course it is going to be staying that way for about 12 to 24 more hours as this storm continues to move very slowly to the west-southwest to west motion. So that is something we're watching there. I think there was another question. I saw some models bringing Henri closer to Nova Scotia. As we mentioned previously, it depends. Like if it gets stronger, then of course we're going to be seeing that more of a westward turn there, which would of course in turn make it go closer to Nova Scotia. So that is something we're going to be having to watch there. Another question about Grace here. Do you think Grace will become a hurricane by late tonight or tomorrow morning? The convection is starting to blow up and wrap around the center. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it could definitely become a hurricane. It's only what 50 knots off of becoming a hurricane, and exiting the Jamaica coast, and it's going to be moving through those obviously favorable conditions. So it's definitely possible it could become a hurricane. By the time I think it'll become one, probably tomorrow morning. So yeah, I think the answer to their question is yes. It definitely could.
We just got another interesting question. This was a question asking, what are the chances of us reaching the auxiliary list in the Atlantic? Of course, this is the well, we're now up to 8 named storms so far out of the 21 that we currently have, and that would put us at the 3rd most active season right now, behind only, of course, 2005 and 2020, both years of which did end up receiving auxiliary names, and then of course the 4th right now would be of 1933, and that did get up to 21 named storms, so I see why this question was asked. As of right now, I feel this is a little bit too early, considering the fact that, of course, the season did just get back to producing storms after a month of inactivity, and it doesn't appear that we're going to be seeing anything in the next 5 days on top of what we already dealt with. We just dealt with Fred. We've got Grace and Andrei there. Although an interesting statistic I did find today was that if Grace and Henri become hurricanes before the 20th, which is what is currently forecast, that would put us, of course, up to 3 for the year, and it would be the first time that we've had 3 hurricanes by that date since 2012. So that is something we're looking. It's definitely like we're going to be seeing about 17 to 20 named storms at the very least. The maximum prediction that we've got right now is from NOAA, which predicts up to 21 named storms. And that is what would put us up to Wanda on the naming list. So there isn't exactly the predictions that we had last year, where they did take us up to the Greeks. Of course, the Greeks got discontinued. Now we have that new alphabet. But as of right now, I believe it is still a little bit too early to say what will happen in terms of whether we will reach the end of the naming list and move on to the auxiliaries.
I mean, yeah, it's possible we could reach the auxiliary list. I still personally think it's gonna happen, but it's just too uncertain considering we are in August, and it's just, my personal thoughts should not be the expectation. So, what the officials are going with is more likely probably what you should be looking at, but we don't know yet. There's a reason why they are predictions. Predictions are not always accurate, and the rest of the season will tell us what's gonna tell us. Yeah, just tell us.
We have a pretty lengthy question here, so hold with me this one. This is based on how the conditions of the Atlantic Basin are trending towards. Do you think that this season could resemble what 1995 or 2017 turned out to be?
100%.
If I actually do remember correctly, from the Colorado State University analogs, which historically the CSU tends to be not too far off with the seasons, as long as they have the right information for it. They're not usually too bad with the analogs either, but as of right now, they currently have 2017 as an actual analog for 2021 there, but they also have 1996, 2001, 2008, as well as 2011 as analogs for this year. Of course, they aren't exactly great analogs, as there was a very serious storm with every one of those years. With 1996, you had Cesar Douglas. You also had Fran as the big ones of that year. You also had the fact that in 2001 we had Allison, and that became very much known for its catastrophic flooding in Texas, one of the two tropical storms that's been retired in Atlantic history. And then once you go into 2008 as an analog, that had some very serious Gulf storms like Gustav. You had Ike. You also had Paloma towards the November area. So that was another year that was very notable. And then another analog that we got this year is 2011. That became very much known for Irene, of course. Irene did make its impact along the eastern seaboard as well as much of the Caribbean. And then 2017, I believe many of the people watching us remember what happened that year. We had Harvey, Irma, Maria. We also had Nate that got retired. So very, very prominent storms that we had in 2017. Doesn't mean that's going to be the expectation. Does not mean we're going to be having a 2017 repeat. It's just that it is a year that can be compared to, or possibly compared to. And that is something that we're definitely going to be having to monitor as we head into September in a few weeks. Peak season is now pretty much at this point just over 3 weeks away, so we are starting to get into the thick of things, and I believe this is going to be the hint of signs to come with Grace and Henri there, a signs of what we are to be expecting. Unfortunately, this is the third storm in a row to be crossing through the Caribbean in terms of impacts, or, well, fourth now, actually, because we had Elsa, Fred, or no, third. Because we had Elsa, we had Fred, and now we have Grace, of course, that is been impacted the Caribbean. Of course, Grace is taking a much different track than the latter two, but regardless, we have been already seeing enough Caribbean storms so far that formed in the main development region, and that likely is going to be pushing eastward in terms of the formation areas. The Cape Verde storms, of course, are going to become more likely, and storms just forming more east in general across the main development region, since we've been seeing those storms take a bit of time before it actually develops. So that is something we're going to have to be monitoring as we head in deeper into what could be yet another active Atlantic hurricane season.
Yeah, and I think the best analog, just short, I think the current best analog in terms of activity is probably 2008 or 1996, and yeah, that's it.
We had a question. What are our thoughts on 16W? Well, we've had 16W for days now. I know because I've been covering this in literally every single tropical weather bulletin, where I basically say the same redundant thing that it's dead, it's dead, it's dead. We always had reformation chances at high, thinking it would reform, mainly because the Joint Typhoon Warning Center and the models were really supportive of it coming back and becoming a typhoon, potentially significant at that. And that is what the JTWC went with. We kind of pretty much disagreed with that because we just didn't see that as a really plausible scenario, so we kind of lowered our chances as a result down to 70 from 90. But since then, the JTWC has actually issued their final advisory, which means they're actually agreeing with us now that it is a remnant low, and they did not expect redevelopment at this time, which means that all advisories are cut off. 16W is no more. The only thing that really supports its development at this point are the HWRF and the CTCX files, which aren't exactly the most reliable when it comes to this region. And they both make it Cat 4s, but obviously that is definitely far from the case of what is to be expected at this point. And at this point, 16W only has a 20% chance of reformation, and even then that might be generous. Of course, we're still going with continuity. Those chances will likely drop to 10 or maybe even 0 in the next day or two. So 16W is far from our greatest threat at this point. It's pretty much just tracking the 4 storms that we've got active, which of course are currently a dying Tropical Depression Fred, Tropical Storm Grace, Tropical Storm Andrei, and of course Category 2 Linda. Of course, National Hurricane Center is going with 1, but we have it at 2 at the moment.
So as for 16W, it was for a while expected to kind of struggle and then intensify rapidly recently. And then, well, yeah, yesterday I went to check the models, and it was very different from what I used to see. I used to see like them expecting a strong storm, and now it was kind of more like a weak system that with maybe chances, and literally no models really expected reformation besides the HWRF, which obviously without recon or radar is usually pretty, it's not really great. So it's really, in my opinion, not looking very good for 16W. I think it's done by now, probably was destroyed, and too far gone to be resurrected.
I'm pulling up while Christian still has a good internet connection here. I pulled up the wind field probabilities of tropical storm force wind fields with Henri there. And you can see that, unfortunately, we've been seeing some more of a westward shift with the chances of seeing those tropical storm force winds. The Outer Banks of North Carolina now have about 5 to 10% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. The extreme Outer Banks now have a 10 to 20. The same can be said for the eastern New York, Long Island portion there, as well as southeastern Connecticut, Massachusetts. Those areas have a 5 to 10% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds now. And then as you head into the outer parts there, you could be seeing a 10 to 20% chance. So unfortunately, those areas now need to watch. Nova Scotia now also has a 5 to 10% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds from Henri as well now. So unfortunately, we have been seeing that turn westward, and if we keep on seeing this shift to the westward there in terms of its track, then these as a result will be shifted west, and we could be talking about a threat that parts of all the way from North Carolina into New England and Nova Scotia need to be watching. So hopefully that does not continue to push more west. Of course, this is going to be an evolving situation. Just like Grace, the forecast in terms of its intensity remains uncertain. Track is much more uncertain as a result as well. So that is something we're going to have to be monitoring in the next 2 days.
Totally agree. I feel as though it's something that a lot of people have to keep on mind in both areas, either if you're in the Western Caribbean or if you're in the Gulf of Mexico or if you're all the way in the East Coast, because honestly, a lot of these storms lately have been very unpredictable and very volatile. So it's always good to keep your guard up and be prepared just in case if you need to be.
That's why they promote these hurricane preparedness weeks, so that way you can make sure that you know where these storms go. And of course, we have been dealing with quite the active last few years now, ever since 2016. Every year has been above average in terms of activity, all with its own notable storms in different locations. So of course, it's definitely important not to let your guard down. 2021's been quite the year so far, with arguably very odd storms in terms of its tracks, intensities, locations, all that stuff. So we've been trying to deal with that, and of course bring you the latest on that information. And of course you can see Andrei is not exactly a normal track that you would see for August either, so that is something that we've been watching as well. Normally with these types of storms in this location, you would normally just see them moving straight up north, or just curving out to the northeast and becoming extratropical. And instead we're seeing this. The last time I saw a track do this, any kind of place, was when we saw Hurricane Chris in 2018. And that was much closer to the coast to start off with, before it pushed off and finally made its northeast turn. So we haven't seen a storm like this in quite some time here, especially not with this track. So definitely interesting what we have been seeing with that. Just another reminder, we are going into the last 10 minutes of this Tropical Weather Bulletin, so if you have any questions, please be sure, before we get on to the on this day and the, of course, next names. So as of right now, we have a few more that we just got. When Tropical Storm Henri hit Connecticut? As of right now, Connecticut's not in the cone, but as of right now, we've still been seeing that shift towards the west, and we still have a 5 to 10% chance of tropical storm force winds being felt there. So I would still, regardless, watch for any kind of westward shift. As a minimal threat, I would say rip currents are definitely a possibility as this does get close. So those who are surfers or planning to go to the beach, you need to be on the lookout for that at the very least. That is definitely going to be something that we are going to be seeing with Henri at the very least, especially as this becomes a hurricane as forecast. Another question, what are the impacts that we're going to be seeing in Monterrey in Mexico?
What was that question again?
Is Monterrey in the cone? Well,
Is
if it's in the cone, which is I don't know, but it's likely because it's at the Gulf Coast. If you are in the cone or even just outside the cone, I would generally be prepared for a significant hurricane impact.
Monterrey's actually in the 5 to 10%
Simple.
tropical storm force wind field. They're not exactly really in a place that's going to be getting severe impacts from this. It's actually somewhat inland, so you're really not going to be seeing much. Rainfall is definitely going to be a possibility. Some gusty winds, but other than that, you're definitely far from the place that's going to be seeing the worst impacts.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, so if anyone's in Monterrey, I would say be prepared for potentially some winds, but mainly a rain-focused event. And if the storm ends up tracking, in this case, more towards the north, that's something definitely keep in mind, especially if you have any travel plans or going anywhere.
Let's see here, getting to some of our more questions. Does there seem to be anything, does there seem to be any sign of anything else forming soon?
If there's any signs of anything else forming right now, I don't believe so. I don't see the NEC predicting anything to have any sort of development within the near future.
Yeah.
But there's always a chance with waves rolling off of the coast of Africa that in the North Atlantic there could be storms that we could be watching within the coming weeks for sure, especially as the peak of the season approaches.
Last I checked, there was a tropical wave that was exiting the African coastline, but however, it is going to be encountering a large amount of dry air thanks to the Saharan air layer outbreak that we're seeing right now, which has caused a lot of the dust and dry air to spill itself over the main development region, which should help keep things at bay for about the next week before things start reopening again. So that is pretty much limiting any other storms on top of what we already have. We don't need any more storms right now. We already have quite a bit, especially because of the fact that Fred did just make landfall yesterday. We've got Grace that's now forecast to become a hurricane, possibly a significant one with the current track. And then, of course, we've got Henri that we're stuck watching. So I think we have enough storms active on our plate right now. We don't need any more.
Not to mention the season has also been pretty much very well ahead of average, only being compared to several of the most active seasons that we've seen so far in the past 2 decades.
Yeah.
So honestly, yeah, we don't need any more action.
To give you an idea of how active this season has been, especially in terms of List 1 terms, the earliest H name on the List 1 side of things that we've had was in September. So this is actually the first time that we've actually had the name of Henri in August. And we've already beat 2 seasons because 2 List 1 seasons never got to Henri. That was 1991 and 1997. So we are already beating 2 List 1 seasons in terms of the name that we got up to. So that is pretty much something that we've been watching here. It's probably going to be the most active List 1 season we've seen. I can say that if you're wondering how active it's going to be. Just like what we saw last year, it began the most active List 6 season and then took that up a notch. Not something we're probably going to be seeing this year in terms of how excessive it's going to be. But regardless, it is looking like it's still going to be the most active List 1 season that we've seen. We're probably going to be looking at new names that we haven't used. Of course, Elsa was the first name that we haven't used yet, and then Jillian will be coming and making this to be later. And then if we get any past Peter, all those new names afterwards, starting with Rose, will be names we have not used before. So that is what we're looking at in terms of that. Another question, will Grace make it into the Eastern Pacific?
I highly doubt it, mainly because there is a lot of mountains where it's going to be passing over, and any odds of that are going to be rather minimal. There could be the chance, of course, remnants would make it across, but chance of that redeveloping into something is also something that we can't really predict at this time. But right now, it's very highly unlikely.
So as for what Orlando was saying, it's pretty unlikely the system will cross into the Eastern Pacific, holding its low-level circulation. And even if it does hold its low-level circulation, it probably will not be closed. So even then, it probably would not be able to maintain itself over land. But it's possible that it could maintain its mid-level circulation over Mexico, reemerge, and it would receive a new name if it were to be redesignated into a tropical storm. But that is plausible that it could possibly, cross over Mexico, reform. But it's about a week out, so we have no idea what's going to happen. Some models have been hinting at that, but it's very hard to tell what's going to happen as to Greece. So right now, I'd focus on the next 36 hours while it's still in the Caribbean Sea.
Couldn't agree more.
Yep, another question which I assume is just a troll. Will Hurricane Linda become a Category 5? Well, no. That's basically my answer to that one. I don't even need to go further.
Linda has been a very resilient storm, but the odds of that are pretty much 0.
Linda is way past its peak, so no.
Yeah, but it's very interesting. Linda has been a very beautiful storm to watch develop and form and peak out of the open waters without harming anyone. Beyond that, it's also very fascinating of how resilient it's been, where instead of weakening, it's kind of been holding, and I believe it even re-intensified a little bit, correct?
Yeah, we've been seeing it intensify slightly more again. I'm going to be wrapping up this before the last with the last question, because it's more just Gray's questions about intensities and what we expect. By tomorrow morning, it's likely that it's either going to be an upper-end tropical storm, potentially a low-end hurricane, so that is something that we could be looking up as we head into tomorrow morning, at least here in the Eastern Time Zone. And as of right now, we will be running with a very high-end Category 1 peak, with the possibility it goes up to Category 2. Tomorrow, if trends continue, we will be forecasting a Category 2 out of this. With Henri, that we are pretty much in agreement with the National Hurricane Center just because of the uncertainty of this, so that is in agreement. 80 miles an hour is what we're expecting with this one. Of course, forecasts can change, and this one remains a little bit of a challenging one, and we will see what goes on with that one. Well, regardless, this is bringing us to 2 minutes to 9, at least over here in the Eastern Time Zone where we are recording this. So, thanks to our team, we are ending this with Amethyst, Christian, Dakota, DJ, Joey, Noah, Orlando, and myself, presenting here Xavier Burns. And of course, that would bring us to the On This Day, thanks to the team. On this day in 2008, funny enough, this actually was an analog year. We had Tropical Storm Faye that was exiting the coast of Cuba and would begin its trip towards Florida, where 4 landfalls would take place. Henri was also active and was about to become a typhoon, and Iselle had weakened down to a disturbance days before and would stay a disturbance, at least with the classifiable low-level circulation, for a few more days. Of course, this is powered by Cyclone History. You can find them on our Twitter below. At Cyclone History, it's on the bottom bar there. So pretty quiet in terms of what we were seeing there, not as active as what we were seeing right now. Well, with that, as Bitten says meow, the next name of the Atlantic is Ida, followed by Julian. In the Eastern Pacific, it's Marty, followed by Nora. And in the Central Pacific, while you can eat fresh at Subway, what isn't freshly coming is Hone, and I'm pretty sure we're not going to be seeing Hone anytime soon here. In the Western Pacific, the next name is Omaze, followed by Kansan, and in the North Indian Ocean, we're still looking out for Gugulab and Shaheen. Moving on over to the Southern Hemisphere, where we start off with the Southwestern Indian Ocean. If the names come on over here, the next name is Anna, followed by Batsirai. The Australian region, we're looking out for Patty and Ruby, and in the South Pacific, it is Cody. We'll be back for another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night. It'll likely be live once again.